So, welcome to today's session. I'm Rachel from Parent Sanctuary, and as part of Let's Build Our Village, a Facebook group that supports parents who have become or had their maternity leave affected by COVID, and our Parent Sanctuary Nature Walks group, we are exploring the topics of being an adult and what being an adult or being a grown-up can mean. One of the things that came to mind was, at some point, I might be the head of a family that's dealing with a death in the family. And do I know what to do when I'm planning a funeral? And whilst I'm in a state of grief, am I going to be making the decisions that I'm happy with long term? So I kind of wanted to develop a little bit of an understanding of what might happen as I grow and have some background knowledge for if this situation arises. And it might help me, it might help my best friend, it might help someone I'm working with. So I wanted to reach out and speak to people who deal with the end of life as a regular occurrence. So I've got Lucy here from the Full Circle Funerals, and she is here to help explain what they do. And if anyone's got any questions, please pop them in the comments. All of Lucy's contact details are going to be in the comments. And if you've been affected, or if you've got any stories that you'd like to share, then please do put them in the comments. And I will find some details of grief counsellors as well, because I think it's really important that if this brings up any, triggers any sort of emotions in you that you're finding it difficult to deal with, then it's responsible of us to point you in the right direction. So Lucy, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, of course. So my name is Lucy. I'm one of the funeral directors at Full Circle. So essentially what we do is plan funerals. And what I find that we do more, what our real role is to stand by people and sort of travel that little journey after someone dies with them and help them navigate the bureaucracy of death, and also try and signpost people to the right places for support. As like Rachel said, it is important to make sure you shower people in care and make sure that they get the support that they need. Yeah, so I'm a funeral director.
So I'm just thinking through the journey, because I've worked as a nurse in hospital and in the community, and for me, the right place of death is the right place of death for that person. For a lot of people, that is home, and for other people, it's like hospice, or it can be as a result of an illness, a sudden acute illness, and it's been a death in hospital. So there are different places where people choose to die. How would we get from either an acute, tragic, sudden death or an unexpected death to coming and finding out about you?
Sure. So when someone dies, it sort of really depends where they die and how they die. So if they die in hospital, for example, usually the person that's died will go to the mortuary unless the family requests otherwise, in which case it's usually a phone call to the funeral director, maybe the first working day or whenever the family feels ready. If the person dies in the community or in a hospice or somewhere without facilities to look after that person, a call to the funeral director usually comes a lot quicker, so probably either before the person dies or just after they've died. And then the funeral director will go and take them to the care and take over the physical care of that person. When there's when someone's expecting to die, the family or the person might want to talk to the funeral director before the actual death happens to kind of get a bit of information, to talk about their options and kind of find a sounding board for what they want for themselves and then what they want for their family member. funeral directors, myself and others, are usually very happy to speak to anyone about their wishes or the wishes of the family. But we will take over the physical care of the person after they have died, obviously, but generally talking about wishes and, you know, trying to figure out what's right for that person, that family, that conversation can happen anytime.
I find a lot of people still find it tricky to discuss about what they'd like for a funeral or what they'd like to be done with their body. As a family, it's something that my grown-ups have discussed with me, and I've discussed with my partner, with my children. It's age appropriate, of course, because my children are only little. But when my firstborn was registered at the doctor's, there was a tick box on the form to say, do you want to be an organ donor? And to me, that was something that was quite important. But I know for a lot of people would see a newborn and find that a very tricky box to tick. There's obviously no right or wrong answers, but obviously I don't know what kind of funeral my dad wants, and my mum wants to make sure that I do it as cheap as possible, so that my brother and I don't spend money on a funeral. She wants us to spend money on a holiday or something meaningful. Yet for other people, the funeral is the meaningful thing.
Absolutely. It really, you know, it's a hard conversation to have sometimes. And I think the trick is to make sure that the people that you care about know where to go to have that conversation should they want to. So it's not for everyone. So for example, you know, my work life, I'm very happy to talk about death and dying, and I'll have a conversation with anyone about funerals. My dad's on an end of life care plan, and for the first time I was propelled into kind of understanding why that's a hard conversation when it's at need. And I think it's a little bit easier to have it sometimes when it's a hypothetical, you know. So if I was talking about my own funeral, my death isn't expected anytime soon, and I hope it won't be for a while. So I feel a little bit more comfortable talking about kind of what I want. But when you are talking about, you know, something that is going to happen very soon, I think it does have a certain air of, I don't know, spice, I guess. But I think the trick is to make sure people know where to go to have that conversation should they want to. And you know, every person's different. There's not one right way to go about this conversation. Like you say, you know, for some people the meaningful thing is going on holiday and not spending a lot on the funeral, and for other people the meaningful thing is the funeral, and you know, having, you know, not necessarily elaborate choices or spending a lot of money. Sometimes it's, you know, it's the cheaper choices, but the more personal choices. For example, we recently supported a family to create it was a cardboard coffin, which is probably one of the cheaper coffins you can get, and they took it home and they decorated it, and there was handprints, and there was a contribution from the dog, and it was one of the most lovely things I've seen. And you know, it was very cost effective, but that obviously isn't right for every family. That was a bit of a waffly answer, wasn't it?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head that, like, when it's hypothetical, it's often a lot easier to have that conversation, which is why I wanted to broach it now amongst my peers, because I feel that these hypothetical conversations, they don't form a plan, but they create some foundations from which to work from when we find ourselves in that situation. And I feel like I'm tripping over my words there a little bit, but it's inevitable. We are all born and we all die. And there's two sure things in our life that are going to happen. Yet we spend more time planning our wedding than we do planning our funeral. We spend more time planning the birth of our child rather than planning or researching the type of parent we want to be. And that's very broad speaking. It's not down to each individual person. I'm not singling anyone out. But generally, we do spend more time planning our holidays then we do this big life event that is so precious. And we spoke a little bit before we got started on the record. End of life is precious and dealt with sensitively and with respect. It can be a very beautiful part of a transition, and it's certainly not something you can do again.
Sure, it absolutely is. You know, it can be a really precious time, and I think there's a lot of fear shrouding end of life and funerals, and I think people kind of think that if they talk about it, it's kind of more real and it's more inclined to happen sooner, which depends what you believe, I guess, but I don't think that necessarily is the case. I think, you know, when it comes to end of life and funerals, like, not a lot of people know kind of what happens after death or what happens, you know, in the last months of life. And I think, you know, part of that fear surrounding it is not knowing. And if you can have these conversations and, you know, even just make, you know, little decisions, or not little decisions, but a small amount of decisions. So like if you want to be buried or cremated, if you want to be buried where, and, you know, if you want to be cremated where, I think kind of they're the main decisions with regards to funerals. And, you know, being able to fulfill someone's wishes in that regard can be really meaningful for the people that are left behind. And, you know, whether people, you know, like cremation or like burial, if it's what that person wanted, it's meaningful to be able to give them that gift of what they wanted. You know, sometimes people make more elaborate plans for what they want for their own funeral, which is totally fine. But I think the important thing is to know whether you want to be buried or cremated, and you need to pass that decision on. And it doesn't have to be a long conversation. You know, it can be, you can write it down once and then you never have to think about it again. But as long as you record kind of that wish, and it's in a place where your family know it is, yeah, I think that's the important thing.
We had Tony from the Legacy Studio on a couple of weeks ago. Well, it's a few months ago now, and having the lasting power of attorney and having that will is sort of part of this step. But that's more to do with your money and making sure that your money and your assets are divvied up. But your choice of whether you go for an eco coffin or whether you go for a burial in a woodland burial site, those sorts of things, there's so many options, isn't there?
Sure.
And we don't know what the options are until we're forced with the choice, or until we see somebody else's journey.
Sure, it really is. But, you know, when you're in that position, when you have to make these choices, you know, there's no time limit on a funeral, but generally, we say about 2 weeks after the person dies. And when you're in that position, if you've lost someone that you care about, and the world's changed and it's never going to be the same again, and then you're trying to make these decisions and choices about things that you never knew existed before, you know, it's a lot. It really is a lot. And I think sometimes maybe it's a little bit more meaningful if you talk about it with the person, or you talk about it before death or at need, and you can go visit the places, and you can really make the decisions that are right for you and your family. There are a lot of choices when it comes to funeral things, and you know, you can be buried in natural woodland, you can be buried in, there's lots of different cemeteries, you can be cremated. Obviously we can't estimate at the moment, but that might be an option in the future. There's lots and lots of different decisions you can make, and it can be overwhelming, I think, when you're at need and you're in a need and you have to make these decisions.
So do you guys get involved in medical science at all? Like where somebody has donated their organs or their body for medical science? And
yes,
I think that might be quite an interesting topic to explore.
I definitely can't comment too much on it because I've not seen it happen that often, and there's been a couple of cases that I can remember that we've, you know, supported the family to arrange for that to happen. I could definitely put you in touch with someone if you want to have a chat about that, but yeah, that is an option. And I think, you know, there's a lot of regulation around that, and it's one of those things that you have to make your family aware of, that that's your choice, because there is a limited time after someone dies that, you know, we can go about making sure that they get to where they need to be. It's, you know, that is time limited.
So how do you plan a funeral around not having a burial or a cremation? I guess that's my question there.
So it's essentially the same process, apart from you don't have to worry about organising the burial cremation. So if you think about a funeral is an event, so it's event planning. Often if there might be, if there's no body, if there's no physical body, you can have things in the place of the body. So things like you can have the ashes of the person if they're returned to the family. You can have memorials, and you can have a photograph of the person in place of the coffin in the service. But the general process for organising the funeral will be very, very similar. The process is very, very similar to organising a funeral with a family.
So, what do we need to do? So we've found our relative has died, and we've got in touch with you, and what are the sort of choices that we're having to make? So type of coffin, cremation or burial. What else? How do we choose which funeral planners?
Sure. It's entirely up to the family, and it's what is right for that family. There's lots of, do you mean funeral planners and funeral director companies?
Yeah.
So I think the best thing to do is to call them and have a conversation, and see if you get on with those people, and see if they would be the right people to support you. There's lots and lots of different funeral directors, and they all do lovely work, and their heart's in the right place. I think there's lots of different approaches to funeral care, and it is a case of go see the premises, have a conversation with them, ask them the questions that you're worried about, because they're generally very happy to answer them for you. I'd recommend doing that before you're at need, because like we talked about before, when you're at need, everything's a little bit more difficult, and there's a lot more going on than if you have a Sunday afternoon to go have a chat with someone. And if you I recommend asking to see the back of the service if that's something you're worried about or is important to you.
Okay, so the back of the service being where the person is bathed and robed.
Sure. Generally, so for example, in our service, it's our mortuary area, and we have a private side on the door. We ignore the sign, it's just so people don't wander in unexpectedly. That's where we have our fridges, where we care for people at an appropriate temperature. It's where we perform personal care, so that is washing and dressing. We also have a visiting room, which if families want to come in and take part in looking after the person that's died, will generally go in there, not because they can't go in the mortuary area, but because there's a little bit of a softer setting. Yeah, I definitely recommend asking, if it's important to you, asking to see those facilities and kind of understand what happens and how that company looks after that person after they've died, but only if it's important to you.
Yeah, with a lot of things in life, what's behind the curtain is more scary than the reality of what we're seeing. So once we can unmask and we can see the truth, we're then more at peace with it. I've taken my children along to funerals. I've introduced my a live cat to my dead cat to say, look, have a sniff, have a see. They've gone, and we've done like a little ceremony where we've buried the cat, just so that the cat wasn't then thinking, well, it's tea time, why hasn't my brother come back? Because they're so intuitive, and children as well. A lot of people think keep them away from a funeral because it's a sad and upsetting place. Yet the laughter of children can be a welcome relief, and sort of a reminder of the circle of life.
I think kids are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. I think they cope with it a lot better than adults sometimes.
And the understanding that people are upset and why they're upset, and seeing this ceremony helps them to deeply understand that they haven't done something wrong to cause mummy and daddy to be crying. They haven't done something wrong, because otherwise there's this air of tension, and they know that there's this air of tension, and they're looking for reasons why that's there. But if they can be part of that ceremony, even though it might be sad, it can be helpful to the children as well.
I think we do have, because we obviously don't want our children to be sad, and we don't want any pain for them at all. But I think, sometimes it's important to kind of be sad and kind of be comfortable with people being sad. And, it is, like you said, it is the only inevitable of life, is that we're going to die. And it doesn't have to be scary. And I think when you try to keep them away, it's sort of seen as this, it's not for them because it's too horrible or it's not appropriate. And I think it is important to kind of keep them in the space where death is, because they're going to have to deal with it at some point. And if it's more familiar to them, it's not as scary, I think. Although everyone is different, obviously. But that would be my approach to that, I think.
Yeah, and my views are based around a nurse that's like worked the hospital walls, that's worked the community. So my views are from living in that environment. Whereas if you've never seen a dead body, where you're going to have a completely different view set to myself and you, Lucy. It's just trying to help people to appreciate that there are reasons to include children in a funeral. I try my best not to give advice, so I'm not giving advice and saying take all your children along to every funeral. It's like don't go scouring the back pages just to take them to a funeral. But if it's appropriate in your family, then it can help with the unmasking of the unknown, and just opening that curtain.
Because I think it keeps a funeral ritual in sort of the family sphere. It's not something that has to be taken out of normal life and gone away and done and behind the curtain and come back. It's this is part of our family, like the person that's died is part of our family, our kids are part of our family, we are together, we're all supporting each other. And it might not be right for everyone, it really might not be, but it might be right for some people who might be not wanting to take the children for out fear that they might make a noise, or I'm not quite sure why people wouldn't take children, but it is essentially a family ritual for people to engage in. And if kids are part of that, then it might be right for them to be there.
So tell me about Full Circle Funeral Planners. What you explained to me at the beginning, it really helped me to put things into my brain for where to place you.
Sure. So Full Circle was founded by Sarah Jones. So we've been around since 2016. And before Sarah was in funeral directing and helping people at the end of life, she started her career in the NHS as a doctor and then trained to be a surgeon. She left the NHS and founded a company to help adults with learning difficulties. And then after that company, she founded Full Circle. So she's come at Full Circle and funeral care from a perspective of a continuation of healthcare and looking after that whole person. And everything we do at Full Circle, I think, reflects that. We're all from health, social and pastoral backgrounds. So before I worked at Full Circle, I used to work at a psychiatric hospital supporting people on the wards. We've all come from a background where it's important to put the person who's supporting at the centre of everything and all the decisions. And I feel like we keep a continuation of that ethos at Full Circle. So that, as how that translates to funeral care, is we look after people before there's a death. So we'll help people to make funeral wishes and talk to them about options, and do things like talking to you about improving funeral education and talking to people about the options that are available. And obviously when someone dies, we'll help the family arrange the funeral, we'll talk to them about options then, and we'll try and put them in a bubble of, I guess, support in the best way that we can. And after the funeral's taken place, we're still in the picture if the family wants us to be. We have a bereavement support group, and also we'll signpost people to the best places possible. I think one of our main jobs is kind of knowing what support is out there and where to signpost people to. It's really confusing, and there was a lot out there, and when someone's died, it's, your world changes, doesn't it? And that's not the time to kind of not know where you're going. And I think part of our role is making sure that person is directed to the best care possible. So that's the full circle.
Fabulous, thank you. And I guess one of the other questions I've got is around cost. And I believe in one of our earlier conversations you were saying that there is moves to get the funeral industry regulated, because people are in a space of grief, and reading articles in the Guardian or the Times or the Daily Mail, and the cost of funerals going up and up and up. And yes, there's inflation, but how much should we be anticipating a funeral to cost?
So it's kind of a little bit of a how long's a piece of string question, but I'm talking to you about kind of this, okay, very general picture. So I'd probably estimate a cremation service to probably be around £4,000. And what that, I suppose the one thing I have to say when it comes to cost is whatever funeral director you use, make sure you understand what is included in what you're paying. For example, funeral director fees, although they might be a very standard for the cost of funeral director fees, what is actually included in that cost varies according to funeral directors. So yeah, I think
look for transparency.
Look for transparency. Understand what you're paying for and what's included in, for example, the simple funeral. There's often a simple funeral advertised, but understand what is necessary for you to pay on top of that. Would be, that's what I have to say.
Okay. And as well as using your services, would you also need to use a person of your faith or your culture, or a celebrant, or
Sure. So there's no rules on, so the celebrant is the person that leads the funeral. So often stands at the front and sort of reads the eulogy, etc. There's no rules about who can do that. The family can do that if they want to. It can be a person of faith, of the person's died, or the family, and they'll often have costs associated with their service. It can also be someone we call a civil celebrant. A civil celebrant is kind of a little bit like a minister, except there's no religious affiliation, but they'll be the sort of professional person that will stand up and speak about the person that's died. Often they include a piece of religious literature if that's important to the family. And then we also have humanist celebrants who generally won't include any religious literature. They will sort of do all the things the civil celebrant will do without the religious element if that's important. But there are no rules. The family members can take the service if they want to, or it can be a friend or anyone sourced from anywhere. There are no rules when it comes to celebrants.
Fabulous. We didn't actually get any questions in this week, so I feel like we've covered most things that people would need to know about. And have you got anything else that you'd like to add?
I guess the only thing I would like to say is to ask questions. Whether that's of a funeral director of your family, questions are always good. And if you're not comfortable talking about these things, that's totally fine. You don't need to be comfortable. You don't have to talk about these things. But if you have questions, funeral directors will be generally very happy to answer them for you. That's the only thing I have to say.
Fabulous. And Full Circle Funerals based in Halifax, and did you say Harrogate as well?
Yes. So we have got one in Guiseley, we've got one in Harrogate, we've got one in Bramley, which sort of serves central Leeds. We've got us in Halifax. And if anyone wants to chat about anything, you know where we are. We're very happy to talk to you.
So would you only work with funeral people who are in the vicinity of those areas?
So we'll work with anyone. It's just generally people choose somewhere local to them. It doesn't have to be the case. We'll work with anyone around the country. Absolutely anyone. And also people abroad, if they have questions, always very happy to answer what we can. And if we don't know the answer, we'll probably know someone that does, so we'll put you in touch with them.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. I'm just to remind everyone to comment on the video or send any questions through. You can send them via email if it's something that you don't want to be broadcast live around YouTube.